say, if you do this, more money will follow for your elections,
Money in politics.
right? And if you don't, we'll primary you.
Right.
So I just want people to know that that's the environment, which is therefore why we really do have to build relationships with folks on both sides of the aisle in this case, because some of them are going to have to take what I will call now courageous stands if things come through, and we're going to have to say, how will we do this? And hopefully at least a little bit of my talk with the stuff in Iowa is that it doesn't have to go all crazy terrible if you have charters. If you can say, well, this is not because we have charters, we have public schools that are innovative, and we have public charters, but they have to be public.
All right, Yvonne, next question.
What are accessibility procedures to assure equity? How will disability educators be addressed in light of laws? And how will attrition, how will attrition be addressed?
Who wants to start?
Well, it's a fact that in charter schools, teacher turnover rates are much higher than in a traditional public school.
2 to 3 years on average.
And it's also a fact that students with disabilities tend to be eased out of charter schools if they don't perform as their same age peers. It's a travesty. It's not right, but it happens every day all over the U.S.
I'd like to add one little thing with that. There is a chain of charter schools in New York City called Success Academy, headed by a formidable woman named Eva Moskowitz. And I'm sorry, louder and with feeling? Okay. There is a chain of charter schools in New York City called Success Academy. You may have seen them in Waiting for Superman. Well, they are not all that in a bag of chips, and I'll tell you why in a moment. For years, the head of that, Eva Moskowitz, said, we do not cherry pick. We're just so great that our schools are better. And if I can be my vulgar self, she must have pissed off the wrong person. Because somebody leaked to the New York Times last year a list whose title was, I couldn't make this up, Kids Who Must Go. And that's exactly what you think it is. The New York Times checked it out, and the students they were able to track down, every one of them had been eased out. Just say.
Susan, any comment on that question?
I think the special ed questions are going to be quite intense. There's a huge problem with working out funding for special needs. When you have a school district, you have a pool. And if this school gets the high need student, the resources are coming from the district to meet those added needs. You can't quite do a funding formula for a school with 100 or 200 kids and have enough to support a few kids with high needs. I have seen in the Tennessee legislation, they just said, you're just going to have to work with your school district. So the district went on having the resources. And if the charter school had a kid with special needs, the district was at the table to formulate the whole IEP.
And that's the argument that they have with parents is, oh, well, if you feel like you're not getting the service for your child at our school, your local public school has lots of resources for your child and their type of disability. Why don't you try your local public school? And that's where they end up coming back to.
All right, next question, Yvonne.
We hear about charter schools being private, but all of them aren't. Many are public. So why are we leading folks to believe they are mostly unsuccessful? Well, many of our public schools are not successful. All of the negatives can be found in some public schools. So why aren't we looking at charters? Why are we looking at charters differently?
Okay.
Because they're making a profit.
So the one thing I would say to that is that there are absolutely bad hospitals, there's bad doctors, there's bad teachers, there's bad schools. That's just a fact of any profession, any place you go. Bad lawyers, bad judges, whatever. Pick your profession, right? But our product is human capital. That's what we produce. It's a very heated subject. Parents bring us the best they got. And we as educators have to do the best we can with what we got. And in places where schools are deemed failures, I would challenge you to go and ask questions about what resources are available to that school.
Yeah.
What opportunities are available to that place? And then go to a successful, my air quotes, go to a successful school and ask what kind of resources and opportunities that school has. I've worked in both places, and I can tell you there are vast differences in district support. And believe me, I've never taught in Jefferson County, so I'm not talking about JCPS, although I'm sure somebody could. But I'm talking about in my school district. The district support for the two schools where I worked was vastly different. The PTA in the first school I worked at brought in over $100,000 a year. I was given a Walmart gift card at the beginning of the year with $500 on it. At the school where I worked and ended my career before I took this job, the PTA had 5 members.
Shawnee?
There were no fundraisers because none of our families could afford to buy any fundraising. We had to write grants or it came out of my pocket. All 8 years I taught at that school that was the lowest performing school in the district, every year on my taxes, I spent more than $1,500 a year on my classroom. Because I was not going to have my kids go without. It's vastly different. That's the conversation we need to be having.
And I want to add one more thing about why charter schools are different, depending on how your law is. You are unhappy with let's make it easy. You're an elementary school parent, and you are unhappy with your child's school. So you run for the SBDM, and you join the PTA, and you hassle your child's principal day and night. Now, your child doesn't go to a public school. Your child goes to your child goes to a for-profit charter school. There's no SBDM. The board that runs that the meetings aren't open to the freaking parents. That is true in a number of states. You can't even go to the freaking board meetings. You know what? Because it's run by a for-profit management company. The meetings of the nonprofit school, where they just tell you what's been decided behind closed doors, you can pack that with 500 people. Because you know what? The needle's broken and the damage is done, and you can't say a thing about it. Parents have no say at their own kid's school. You know why? Because those decisions are made by for-profit management schools, like the one that guy in Florida champions. And you have no say.
All right. I'm going to have to address the question of not painting our public schools as all we actually want them to be. Because we are living with horrendous achievement gaps. We are making very little progress on lifting students who are in those achievement gap groups. We are in fact seeing the gaps get bigger on a whole set of metrics. That's the thing I normally do for the Pritchard Committee. And I don't mean that that's an argument for charter schools. I mean that we shouldn't be speaking of public schools without letting that ache and without being sure we know what we're going to do in the next week to work on that too. in the Pritchard Committee's Achievement Gap Study Group, the number that knocked me over was when I figured out that we had an in-school suspension for every African American kid in the state. Not that every kid has been suspended, but the number was big enough that if we'd spread them out evenly, every kid could have been suspended. And I don't see how that doesn't radiate out to kids who are not being suspended that their classmates are disappearing. I don't think we should talk about public schools as all that, because part of what we want in our hearts, we're not delivering with our muscles yet. And I do want to say that before the charter schools aren't the solution gets away to, and public schools are all we want, because none of us actually think that, and I just felt like I had to say that much before we just
So for me, I'd like to take that argument though a little bit deeper, because I think the focus on test score gaps, which are really not achievements, the focus on test score gaps has been part and parcel of the same thing with regard to making all schools be painted in certain ways. So I'm going to stay true to what I said before about the focus on the public and the development of human beings and citizens. All schools should be focused on developing human beings and citizens and be public and accountable in deep ways, far beyond the results of test scores. So, which then creates a false appearance. See, I said don't focus on the results with regard to the ones that have been put up there so much, but focus on all the other whole spectrum of things, which can include results, but they better be about, what about the rich curriculum gap? What about the notion of developing strengths and talents and having kids be able to have the kinds of learning environments that no matter what your income, right, being exposed to teachers who actually are certificated and so forth. But so my point is that I really think we have to look at what our purpose is in all public schools, hold all schools accountable for those things, and then literally create a more kind of a comprehensive way that we look at how well a school is doing. And then if they're going to be a charter school, they have to do that too. The problem of posing them as separate is this. At least with public schools, I can go to them and make that argument. If I then, my charter, my authorizer is no longer committed to those things, how can I now make that argument? So that's why I think charter schools are really a ruse, reacting to real things that are problems in our schools. I'm not trying to ignore those at all. I'm trying to say we need to commit to solving all those kinds of problems and not just look at the test score results and say something's good or bad based on that.
So Susan, let me ask you this question then. It seems to me the question is that there were charter schools were put out here as ways to take care of all these problems in the public schools. And that's where some of this negativity has come, whereas it sounds like from what you're saying, because they were public in Iowa, they were not trying to take everything away from the public schools. They were just trying to be innovative and try to do a better job wherever they were.
Because they were made to be part of the public schools. They were part of the public schools.
I think that's an important origin question. So I need to mention the years I served in the Reagan administration. This was an interesting thing to explain in my family, in case I don't radiate progressive stuff. But in those years, I was assigned to write a manual on parent choice of schools. And the two people I was sent to work with were Joe Nathan at the Hubert Humphrey School of Public Policy in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Charles Glenn, Director of the Bureau of Equal Educational Opportunity for the state of Massachusetts, Michael Dukakis governor. Those were the two. Those two guys were at the 92 meeting where people said, we need ways to have new kinds of public schools. We're going to call them charter schools. So the starting energy wasn't all right wing. The sweep in of market theory privatizers has been vast since then. But the starting ideas were innovation. The starting ideas were opening up some new possibilities. I usually call it was the hippie theory. We want 1,000 flowers to bloom. The charter movement doesn't look like many different kinds of flowers blooming anymore. It looks like a few small variations. And I think it's important to see that the hope that there was an innovation just waiting to happen doesn't show up in most places, though it does show up for some urban systems and for African American students and low-income students, and we shouldn't walk away from that. If we want to say we don't think charters are the solution, that it's time to bring it on what else are we going to do that's going to get something different. And that includes if we want to look at other features than the ones we can measure easily, which I agree with. We should bring that too.
We should bring it.
Right. And that I think is a really important challenge when you're worrying about charter schools, is don't let that pull you away from vision for each child.
So to clarify too, though, then there are public charter schools and then there are private charter schools. Is that, can we?
No.
Yes.
No.
You know what I'm
No,
saying?
because
If
they're
you ask Alex, they call them all public charter schools. Because the
they're getting
public,
public money.
because they suck at the public nipple.
Okay, but let's start out at the top. So starting at the top, there would be private charter schools, public charter
No.
schools.
They
No.
call them all public, even when they are run
You
by
can't call them
for-profit.
charter unless they're getting money.
No, wait. Public charter schools, private charter schools, but then the question is, where does the money come from?
That's right.
That is right.
It's
So that's,
public
I'm
money.
just trying to lay it
private
out so
schools.
that when you ask the questions,
not
you
public
understand.
money.
It's just a regular private school.
Yeah.
They're called
It
private
could
schools,
be a
not
public
private
charter
charter
school
schools.
that's getting public money, or it could be the Iowa plan, but it could be a private charter school that's getting public money.
Yeah, no,
No, it can be, yes, there are,
There are for-profit charter schools where the only input from the public is when you write a check.
okay, but the
You
question is,
can't go to their
though,
meetings, you can't influence what they do there, not even the parents.
but can you be a private charter school in some state and get public money?
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And then separate from
vouchers.
that would be a for-profit
That's what most of them are.
private charter school.
It's pretty much the same thing.
Well, if it's for-profit, but they wouldn't necessarily get money from the state?
If they're a
In
charter
several
school,
states-
they get money from the state.
In several states, you can have for-profit charter schools. That's why there's these big chains that make millions.
Yes.
Publicly funded, but they are for-profit. They skim off the top.
So if there's no public funds, it's just a private school?
Yes, yes.
Right, so it's
Which leads to this question: are the problems with charter schools because they are run by for-profit groups? My answer would be yes.
Alright, well, Susan,
Although even nonprofits have problems.
Yeah.
Because of the variation in governance, the for-profit sector is relatively small. I'm trying to remember if I've seen research that separates out the for-profits. There's strong research on cyber charters, which just
Oh my
says
God.
they just
Suck
it-
the money
actually, that's
and
really
give
all
you
need
nothing
to
in
hear,
return.
Right. Cyber charters have been failing with impressive consistency.
K-12 is like the worst.
It's kids stay at home with a computer.
Virtual.
And they still get the same per pupil allocation as a brick and mortar.
That's a really tough one. I don't trust my memory that the studies that have separated out kinds of governance show a difference between for-profit and non-profit charter organizers. I think it tilts to the nonprofits have a little advantage, but it wasn't big enough for people to use that as the proof that we shouldn't go there.
either one of you? Alright, next question, you got another one?
Why are we considering private charter schools when many charter schools are public? Why are we talking about the underachievement of some charter schools, but we aren't talking about underachieving public schools? What we need to do is to explore how we can solve underachievements,
Regardless of where,
regardless of where.
regardless of where. Okay.
How do we, as the League of Women Voters, put racial justice in the forefront of the fight against charter schools?
The NAACP has recently said they're.
Yeah, the NAACP has recently called for a moratorium on charter schools.
Right.
The NAACP on a national level.
Oh,
It's in, the NAACP, press release is in your report.
Yeah, right, and then put it off on them.
I think
Yeah, oh, yeah, we will be responsible for that.
That's what we're saying.
Any comment on any of that?
I would just say that it's not any one person's responsibility. It's all of
Yeah.
our responsibility to make sure that social justice is, well, I mean, I believe this to my core, but there are many people in our world who do not believe in social justice, but I believe that every child should have an equal opportunity for a quality public education in Kentucky or anywhere else in the world. And if I can't use my white privilege to speak up for people who are oppressed, then I am not doing my job, I feel like personally, as a citizen of this great United States.
All right, let me say this, as president, I would invite those of you who are interested to do, you can do two things. You can join the Charter Schools Committee, and you can join the Education Committee, right, Brian? Yeah, we have an Education Committee, so, obviously, there's lots of work to do. I think we need to thank these,